Oh God, my heart is not lifted up. Will you pray with me, please? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. So this morning's psalm stands in contrast to Psalm 123, where we began this series on the pilgrimage psalms. In Psalm 123, the psalmist was lifting his eyes up until the hills. We were at the beginning of the journey, anticipating an exciting trip. Now, for some reason, our eyes are not lifted too high. We are still on pilgrimage, but we no longer feel so inspired. What do these opening verses of the psalm mean to you? O God, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great or things too marvelous for me. What do those words mean to you? How we receive these words probably has a lot to do with where we are personally when we hear them. Some think this is David writing, and he is trying to be humble, showing an uncharacteristic lack of pride. You remember David, the guy who danced naked through the streets? Yeah. Some of the phrases in this psalm are familiar Hebrew expressions for humility. More recently, critics have begun to posit that this psalm might have been written by a woman. And these words that open the psalm might be an apology for speaking because she's part of a patriarchal culture, and she might need to preface any words she would say out loud with a disclaimer. I'm not worthy. I think we've all done this. I'm not worthy to say anything, but here are my thoughts. And so this may be what the psalmist is thinking. Now, when I read the psalm to my sister, she immediately thought, and she's my younger sister, by the way, she immediately thought of the maturity that comes with age. Imagining that the psalmist perhaps has left behind his ambitious youth and has reached the point where he no longer thinks of things too marvelous for him, but yet appreciates the normal things in life, calm and quiet. And for those of us who have gone through loss recently, this psalm evokes perhaps someone who is grieving, who is at the point where the pain is still so strong she cannot lift her eyes. And I have to say, when I read these words first, I immediately thought, this person is depressed. And for anyone who's experienced depression, you know the lack of ego that comes with it, the loss of the sense of self, the inability to raise one's eyes or think lofty thoughts. The late theologian and Presbyterian minister Frederick Buechner wrote that this psalm is one of the most precious and least known. I love that, because I didn't know this psalm either. He writes that the psalmist does indeed seem depressed. To be in a state of depression is like that. It is to be unable to occupy yourself with anything much except your state of depression. Even the most marvelous thing is like music to the deaf. Even the greatest thing is like a shower of stars to the blind. You do not raise either your heart or your eyes to the heights, because to do so only reminds you that you are yourself in the depths. And this is a pretty good description of depression: the lack of interest in those things that used to excite you, the exhaustion that might come from the thought of something like getting dressed or taking a shower, the courage it takes to go to work or to face a social situation. Since this psalm is part of the Psalms of Ascents, psalms sung by people on a journey, we might imagine the journey has become wearying. Life has gone from exciting visions of the future to a day-to-day reality that is not always uplifting. Perhaps the psalmist is a mother trying to care for young children while traveling in a caravan of pilgrims. Perhaps she's walked many miles each day carrying a child. The psalmist, though, offers us a word of hope, something that's sometimes challenging to do. She tells us that she has calmed and quieted her soul, like a weaned child with its mother. A calm and quiet soul may be all that she can aspire to. Yet, in my estimation, a calm and quiet soul is quite an achievement. As we experience life, as the journey gets tough, sometimes seemingly for no reason at all, as Jamie Lee Curtis reminded us in the children's story, we go through many states of emotions: highs, low moods, sadness, cheerfulness, irritableness, boredom, and anger. And while there are some effective treatments for clinical depression, there is, as they say, no cure for being human. A calm and quiet soul sounds like a respite from the barrage of internal states that can make up a human being's life. A calm and quiet soul sounds like something worth having. So let's take a look at this language a little more closely. The psalmist says she has calmed and quieted her soul. She says she has done it. She doesn't reveal how. Her soul is like a weaned child with its mother. And for those of you who are breastfeeding or have nursed a baby or look forward to doing that, you know that to wean a child is to come to a point of transition in the child's life. And it's interesting the psalmist chose the image of the weaned child rather than the nursing baby. The weaned child is the toddler who has begun to explore away from the mother. The young child who has begun to experience a separate life from the mother. She may have ventured off to preschool or to visit grandma for a few days. While away, she may have skinned her knee or had some hurt feelings. When the weaned child comes back to the mother, she experiences the comfortableness of her home, a place of refuge, a powerful sense of peace, of shalom, that comes from feeling held and at home. And this is what the psalmist feels. She is at home with God. Her soul is quiet, and she has hope for the future. It's important to note that for some of us, this image of mother might be difficult, especially if our mother was not able to provide unconditional love, or if we lost our mother at an early age. The metaphor of God being like a loving mother, though, helps broaden our sense of who God is. J.B. Phillips wrote one of my favorite books on the Christian faith. It's called Your God is Too Small. In it, he unpacks many of the images of God we carry around unconsciously, from resident policeman to managing director of our lives to pale Galilean. One of the images he talks about for God is heavenly bosom. And Phillips encourages us not to fall into the escapism of believing God is like a mom where we can run every time we get hurt. In his view, we need to remember that God is always both a refuge and a strength. And as much as I've loved this book over the years, I would offer a different sort of take on these many images of God that Phillips discusses. I believe each of these images helps us to gain an appreciation of the mystery that is God. That's why to be truly inclusive is to include all helpful images of God. Father and mother being amongst them, home and refuge being others. And heavenly bosom is just fine too. So how can we experience this God of respite and refuge? How do we quiet and calm our souls? One way is to become this home for another person. Oncologist and Professor Rachel Naomi Remen tells the story of a highly skilled AIDS doctor who keeps a picture of her grandmother in her home and spends a few minutes with this picture each day before she goes to work. And here's why. As a child, this doctor had a kitten who died in an accident. This is so sad, but if you've ever lost a kitten, and I have, it's very, very sad. And it was her first experience with death. And the adults around her told her not to be sad. The kitten was in heaven with God. But somehow she remembers she did not find this comforting. Finally, she went to her grandmother, who offered her no such assurances. She simply took the child onto her lap and held her. My grandmother was a lap, this doctor recalls, a place of refuge. I know a great deal about AIDS, but what I really want for my patients, what I really want to be for my patients is a lap. A place from which they can face what they have to face and not be alone. Dr. Remen suggests that one way to be a home for another person is to offer your silence. Not the sort of silence that is filled with criticism or withdrawal, she says, but the sort of silence that is a place of refuge, of rest, of acceptance of someone as they are. We are all hungry for this other silence. It's hard to find. In its presence, we can remember something beyond the moment, a strength on which to build a life. Silence is a place of great power and healing. Silence, she writes, is God's lap. And the power of silence comes from our ability to make space for another person, to listen, to accept, and to receive them as they are. To seek not so much to be understood, as St. Francis wrote, but to understand. To allow them to find their own still center, their own calm, their own quiet soul. To remember themselves. And this kind of receiving is love. It's holding one another in the arms of love. It's taking someone onto your lap until they can find their own connection to a still point that dwells deep within each of us. Sylvia Purdy offers this interpretation of the psalm. So listen for the different words. Shush, my heart. Rest in the Lord. Close my eyes. Rest in the Lord. Thoughts, stop rushing. Body, relax. Oh, my soul, be calm and quiet. Breathe in and out and be still. Big ideas and important jobs can wait. Yesterday's hurts and tomorrow's worries can drift off, for here and now, I am held in the arms of God, like a little child, half asleep in her mother's arms. Trust in the Lord in this moment and forevermore. Amen